Yeah. This is Vague Heuristics by Maria G. Navarro and Conjectures, Hypotheses, and Fuzzy Logic. So this is a book chapter, apparently. Not a short one. And found for us by Viper's Gratitude. Thank you, Vipers. Quote. And oh yeah, as always, feel free to ask questions, find out whatever. Let me know along the way. For some thinkers, the failure of either the principle of non-contradiction or that of the excluded middle means that the corresponding theoretical developments are based on trembling grounds. But things are what they are, and the principles fail in many cases. And that's Enrique Trias. Yeah, and for those who don't know, the principle of non-contradiction basically means things can be either true or false, but not both. You can't contradict yourself. Or the excluded middle is basically saying, look, it's either A or B, but like you can't have if it's one, then it's not the other. So you can't have like things that are both true and false, and you can have something that's A or it's B, but not both. That like if A is false, then it means B has to be true, and vice versa. All right. So here we go. Introduction. Even when they are defined with precision, one can often read and hear judgments about the vagueness of heuristics in debates about heuristic reasoning. This opinion is not just frequent, but also quite reasonable. In fact, during the 90s, there was a certain controversy concerning this topic that confronted two of the leading groups in the field of heuristic reasoning research, each of whom held very different perspectives. In the present text, we will focus on two of the papers published in Psychological Review, wherein the arguments of each of these groups were presented. On the one hand, Kahneman and Tversky, and on the other, Gigerenzer and Murray. Okay, so just so you guys know, Kahneman and Tversky won the Nobel Prize for their work in like the late 70s and early 80s, showing that people do not reason in like this was called the a framing problem. So it's the Linda problem. If you look at how people reason, they don't reason according to the laws of probability. And so these guys got very famous. Gigerenzer, on the other hand, was championing heuristics, saying people do follow the rules of heuristics, not that they follow the laws of probability. The laws of heuristics or heuristic reasoning are different. So that's Gigerenzer. Okay, essentially there are two reasons for carrying out an analysis of this controversy in this article. Firstly, because in the subsequent literature there is no analysis of the impact of those allegedly opposed positions in the development of both groups' research programs, especially in the case of adaptive behavior cognition research group at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. The second reason is related to the perspective that will be proposed here to interpret those results. This is interesting, says Adam Fighter. Oh, I hope so. We don't know yet. I hope it's interesting. We've been fooled before. According to that perspective, if we take into account the scientific production of Trillis regarding the meaning of the terms such as vagueness and fuzziness, there would be reason to believe that Gigerenzer's controverted response to Kahneman and Tversky allows, even today, for new interpretations to be made. This is the objective of the present paper. The interpretation proposed here intends to be evaluated taking into account whether or not it is relevant to explore the social dimension of heuristic reasoning. Nowadays, what we know as social heuristics are the subject of much debate and research. According to the interpretation we propose, when Gigerenzer objected that the heuristic and biases program of Kahneman and Tversky was based on a vague conception of heuristics, he was not merely stating the truth, but was also detecting a research niche of great interest, in spite of the fact that, as far as we know, that niche has not been sufficiently explored. It is not the same to state that heuristics are vague if the author who makes this assertion is in favor of a semantic perspective, for example, because he or she supports a theory of truth degrees, as if the author is in favor of epistemicism in his or her perspective on vagueness. Okay, so epistemicism, for those who know, says even though we might not know certain things, like how many hairs it would be on your head, before you go bald. Like, so there is a certain number of hairs that you have to have on your head, and after that you're not bald, and then once you lose that, or you're down to that number of hairs, then you're balding. Epistemicism says there is some number, but we don't know what it is. So like, you are going bald once you hit this number, even though no one actually has an actual count of what that number is. That number does exist. That's epistemicism. So, like, it's the view that, like, things are vague, but there is an actual answer. Okay, nevertheless, before exploring those perspectives and the way in which they could affect the notion of heuristics, it is necessary to carry out a comprehensive interpretation of the debate between those psychologists of reasoning in 1996. Okay, so we're doing some history here. This is haven't done anything like this in a while. Reasoning with content-blind norms. If we could travel in time and go back to the date in which the controversy started, for the moment, therefore, we will not take into account those significant publications that have appeared subsequently, we could state in general that Kahneman and Tversky considered that the main goal of the Heuristics and Biases program has been to understand the cognitive processes that produce both valid and invalid judgments. That is how Gigerenzer described the research objective of the Heuristics and Biases program. Here we do not propose to make any detailed discourse analysis. For example, we will avoid examining if the one describing his opponent's program is incurring or not in the strawman fallacy. In order to satisfy the objectives announced in the previous section, it will suffice to detect the main differences between both research groups. Yeah, they're not pointing fingers here, they're just trying to show what the difference is. Which is fair, given that we don't actually care that if someone made a mistake in their argument 20 years ago or 30 years ago now, but we want to see like what their position was, not if they made a mistake one time. According to that initial presentation, the second group would be characterized by their proposal of models of cognitive processes that predict when frequency and probability judgments are valid and when they are invalid according to certain norms, and the fact that they also explain why. Indeed, this last question is considered essential in order to avoid both vagueness and excessively strict norms in the debate about what constitutes a good question and a satisfactory answer in psychological research or on reasoning. The application of both criteria, narrow norms and vagueness, could produce a notion of heuristics that explains too little and too much. Gigerenzer constructs a complex argument from a set of simple arguments which, taken into account individually, can be described as two reasons. Alright, now this is a box, so I don't know how well you can see this, but this is the first box. The norms for evaluating reasons are too narrowly drawn. Second box. Vague heuristics have directed attention away from detailed models of cognitive processes and towards post hoc accounts of alleged errors. Therefore, third box. Judgments deviating from these norms will be mistakenly interpreted as cognitive illusions. Okay. So basically, they'll explain this. Gigerenzer refers to and describes several facts to justify his reasons and illustrate his main argument. The first one consists of appealing to a certain research practice common to specialists whom we consider to have a certain academic authority in their field. Alright, and this is a quote from Gigerenzer, it looks like. The first issue on which Kahneman and Tversky and I disagree concerns the question of what counts as sound statistical reasoning. Most practicing statisticians start by investigating the content of a problem, work out a set of assumptions, and finally build a statistical model based on these assumptions. End quote. The author then insists on the fact that, in spite of the aforementioned practice, Kahneman and Tversky work in a quite a peculiar in Kahneman and Tversky's work, a quite peculiar fact is observed that is described in the following terms. Quote, the Heuristics and Biases program starts at the opposite end. A convenient statistical principle such as the conjunction rule or Bayes rule is chosen as a normative, and some real-world content is filled in afterwards on the assumption that only structure matters. The content of the problem is not analyzed in building a normative model, nor are the specific assumptions people make about the situation. With the aim, and that's end quote. With the aim of providing an example on which the previous objections can be based, and thus in order to clarify the referred facts, Gigerenzer presents the results obtained by his colleagues concerning the famous Linda problem. He describes them in the following way, and I can tell you all about the Linda problem. I have a paper on this. Quote, for instance, consider the Linda problem in which participants read a description that suggests that Linda is a feminist and are asked, which is more probable? A. Linda is a bank teller, or B. Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. Tversky and Kahneman's norm of sound reasoning here is the conjunction rule, and only the conjunction rule, which leads them to conclude that answering the conjunction, the T and F, that she's a teller and a feminist, is a fallacy. And here's the thing. The Linda problem says, if you ask someone, that was a feminist when they were younger and now are a bank teller, is it more likely that they are just a bank teller or a bank teller and a feminist? No, shouldn't say it. They are not now. If they were a feminist in the past, what's more likely, that they're a bank teller or a bank teller and a feminist? And by regular numbers, it's always one thing is always less likely than the same thing in a conjunction with two things, and that's the conjunction rule. And so you can always say that the likelihood of two things being together is always less than or equal to the likelihood of the singleton. So, and they, like I said, they won the Nobel Prize for this sort of stuff. Okay, so Gigerenzer maintains that while his colleagues describe in that way the results they obtained for the Linda prom, they do so because they apply an interpretation criterion based on narrow norms. And he adds that there are two reasons to believe that the application of those norms is excessively and unnecessarily narrow. Yeah, Adam Fighter, that's what they claimed. I disagree with them too. I'm on Gigerenzer's side for different reasons. I think Kahneman and Tversky are wrong, but I have different reasons for maintaining that. I think their interpretation of... because Gigerenzer here is saying that the conjunction, they're applying the conjunction fallacy willy-nilly, and that's not how statisticians work. My position is that they got the logic wrong, and so they are applying probability norms where they shouldn't be applied because their logic is bad. But that's something else. But like, yeah, you don't have to take Tversky and Kahneman's word for it. There are people who disagree. Okay, so and if you ask people, most people are actually much more likely to fail, according to Tversky and Kahneman. But like, there's a lot of research into this, and I mean a lot. Okay, so this is Gigerenzer's analysis. Number one, probability theory is imposed as a norm for a single event. Whether Linda is a bank teller, this would be considered misguided by those statisticians who hold that probability theory is about repeated events. And two, the norm is applied in a content-blind way with the assumption that judgments about what counts as sound reasoning may ignore content and context. Adam Fighter says, the logic is wrong. Most likely their assumption might be wrong. You just can't use math. Firstly, you must prove the assumption you're holding on, then apply math, and you agree with me. I think what you just said there, you're agreeing with Gigerenzer. This is what I think you're agreeing with our general position here, both me and Gigerenzer. They're saying, look, you can't just apply the math here. You have to justify the events. And that's the thing. They're imposing it on a single event, which is basically, you can't do that. You have to prove the assumption, as you said, and that's not going to work on a single event. You need multiple events, and then you can go look for a regularity. And so that's what Gigerenzer is saying here. Okay. The counterexample used in this article to oppose the use of narrow norms to analyze the application of probability laws to singular events is as follows. Because an adequate context can be created to introduce this norm and obtain the indicated results, it is therefore not contradictory to assume that an adequate context could be described to introduce the norm in such a way that it does not lead interviewees to use the conjunction fallacy. Yeah, so you could maybe frame it differently. Viper says, so apparently you can tell I'm engaged when I stop heckling. Yeah, you're probably making cereal or something. Yeah. And or on the other hand, that you are bored out of your mind by the paper I'm reading and just can't muster the will to say anything clever because it's just not worth your time anymore, which I also fully understand. Yeah. Okay, continuing. This counter-argument presents a hypothetical situation. Actually, do I have that? Shoot, I don't have, so annoying. My BTTV, I need to do this. Your brain is seeing Venn diagrams. Careful. Alright, do I have, the Dan I need to fix this problem. But, like, I'm gonna have, like, a emote review. There is no bottom to the depths of your snarkiness. Yeah, but everyone runs out of patience eventually. So you might have some snark, but the will to communicate the snark may do it. Well, I'm happy you like it, Adam Fighter. Oh, so far so good. And you can thank Vipers. Vipers actually found this one. I did not find this one. Okay. This counterargument presents a hypothetical situation in which the two fundamental notions of this polemical debate are used: single event probabilities and content blind norms. In order to reach a conclusion, the conjunction fallacy is not universally applicable as a sound reasoning norm. You're invested now, Adam Fighter? Okay. Well, that's the thing. This was a debate back in the day, and you want to see how it ends? Sure. We're going to see how this author says it plays out. No, I don't Disney nothing. This could be stated in more precise terms. The application of probability laws to any type of propositions about singular events is not a good criterion to determine cognitive illusions, because the norm or the criterion presumably used by people to solve the problem is not universally applied as a norm of sound reasoning. Yeah, so this is basically, you can't just apply a law of probability willy-nilly. You have to know it's actually applicable in that point, which is very hard to do in single event probabilities. Like, that's the thing. If you're doing a single event probability and you're not looking at what's going on in context, how do you know the law should be applied at that point? Continuing. As other scenarios could be considered, that means other contexts linked to a different exposition of the case information. The strongest objection by Gigerenzer has to do with the equivocal assumption that there are content-blind norms of reasoning. Yeah, so can you just apply this norm of reasoning, this probabilistic one, any old time? Doesn't matter what the content is. His counterargument confronts the results of Kahneman and Tversky's with the support of two reasons. The application of single event probabilities concerning any circumstance, that is, single event propositions, is not well defined if the statistical principle is imposed as a norm. That means, and this would be the second reason, if the content is not analyzed, thus applying content blind norms. Yeah, so if you just have like T's and F's like they did, like Teller and Feminist, and you can just say, look, is T less likely than T and F, then like it doesn't matter what the content is, and that's how they're doing it. They claim that the content doesn't really matter. The probability of two things, a conjunction, always has to be less than or equal to the probability of the one thing. So yeah. Because, like, yeah, even if the second thing is always true, then you're still just dependent on that one other option. Okay, the second reason, based on the idea that content-blind norms might exist, has more weight from an argumentative point of view. Yeah, reality is messy. Absolutely, Adam Fighter. After all, if the meaning of probable cannot be reduced to the case, for example, to the application of meaning of the conjunction fallacy, this is due to the plurality of acceptations that the term plausible has for all of us. The application of narrow norms such as interpretation criteria for the obtained results is inadvisable because people do not reason using content blind norms. Yeah, so even if you think it does apply sometimes, that's not how people talk about stuff. And so why are you applying something to how people think about stuff? Because they are analyzing the content. They are not blind to it. Okay, in the case of the example, if we refer to the OED, interviewees might be reasoning taking into account, among others, one of these acceptations of probability. So I guess I don't know what this word acceptations mean. I guess it would be meanings of the word probability. So people might mean either plausible or having an appearance of truth, or that may, in view of present evidence, be reasonably expected to happen. Gigerenzer's counterargument is summed with a determining persuasive charge, which when he states that, quote, these legitimate meanings in natural language have little, if anything, to do with mathematical probability. Similarly, the meaning of and in natural language rarely matches that of a logical and. The phrase T and F, that would be the teller and feminist, can be understood as the conditional, if Linda is a bank teller, then she is active in the feminist movement. Note that this interpretation would not concern and therefore could not violate the conjunction rule. Yeah, so he's changing because people often actually in English do not use and, they use it actually as more of a conditional. And that's what Gigerenzer is pointing out here, that people may not even be interpreting the and in teller and feminist as a conjunction. They may be doing it as a conditional. Okay, so not a conjunction conditional. If I said something wrong, I'm sorry. Viper says, noun, a particular sense of or the generally recognized meaning, common acceptation of a word or phrase. Thank you for the definition. Oh, okay, it is a noun, a particular sense or the generally recognized meaning. Yeah, I've never seen that before though, but thank you. Okay, continuing on the quote from Gigerenzer. Semantic inferences, how one infers the meaning of polysemous terms such as probable, form the content of a sentence. Polysemous means multi-meaning words. Yeah, I mean, this is what you get in philosophy. People like using big words. It's painful sometimes. But anyway, so polysemous terms, that's multi-meaning terms such as probable, form the content of a sentence or the broader context of communication in practically no time, are extraordinarily intelligent processes. They are not reasoning fallacies. No computer program, to say nothing of the conjunction rule, has yet mastered this form of intelligence. Significant cognitive processes such as these will be overlooked and even misclassified as cognitive illusions by content-blind norms. Yeah, so basically they're saying, look, people get the whole scene and we're figuring out the meanings based on like the whole thing extraordinarily, and it takes a lot of intelligence to figure out what things mean in no time, and the computer is clearly not doing this, or just you can't apply a rule willy-nilly. So okay. Author says, up to this point, we agree with Gigerenzer's counterargument. The psychologists use an argument that coordinates two simple ones. Taken separately, they can be considered two good reasons as they lead to a representation of human reasoning that, apparently, fits better with the practice of ordinary reasoning. In the case of this latter fact, it is crucial to understand why it is persuasive. Nevertheless, our disagreement starts precisely in the point where this author accuses Kahneman and Tversky's proposal of being vague. I would contend that Gigerenzer does not notice the fact that his own proposal might be understood as an invitation to think about the role of vagueness in ordinary reasoning. This is precisely the point where, in my view, Triller's scientific production seems to me to be essential to carry out an interpretation based on arguments. According to the interpretation I am going to suggest, if I am not mistaken in this important controversy, a perfect opportunity was missed to explore the meaning and function of vagueness in our reasoning process. Even though the year 1996 now seems quite far away, in my view, testing this interpretation is still relevant for the current research on heuristics, and in particular in the field that is related to the social dimension of this type of ordinary reasoning. Okay, so basically, author is saying here that, look, we figure all this stuff out, and Gigerenzer is claiming, look, we figured this stuff out immediately, so clearly what's going on in Kahneman and Tversky is not the same thing, because like you're sort of just applying rules without figuring stuff out. Now the author is saying, look, no. Maybe we have to look at this as a time when things are vague. It's not that we figure it out and that's what's important. It's that these things are inherently vague, and then we're maybe, imposing meaning on stuff, but they're inherently vague. And so that would be like an in-between way between Gigerenzer and Kahneman and Tversky, I think. And I think that's where we're going with this. Okay. So, the Heuristics and Biases program. We started with the affirmation that even when defined with precision, in debates concerning heuristic reasoning, it is frequent to find judgments concerning the vagueness of heuristics, and we also stated that this opinion is not only frequent but even seems reasonable. Research on heuristic reasoning as a type of cognitive process has developed in an especially significant way from the 70s onwards. In spite of the fact that many years have gone by since 1996, it is difficult to find a publication where the causes related to the vagueness of the heuristic and biases program are better described. There would be at least 6 reasons why that program is vague, or even too vague to count as an explanation of the investigated phenomenon, when that's heuristic reasoning. That program would be vague because of the following reasons and or circumstances. The first bullet point. The reluctance to specify precise and falsifiable process models. Second bullet point. Too vague to clarify the antecedent conditions that elicit various heuristics. Third bullet point. Too vague to work out the relation between heuristics. Fourth. Connection between narrow norms and the absence of process models. Fifth, Kahneman and Tversky did not start with the content but started with a statistical rule. And last bullet point, they assumed that there was only one correct answer to be determined mechanically by plugging in values and computing outcomes. Yeah, I mean, that was the whole thing. They took their rule and they applied it. They did not look at what was going on ahead of time. All right. Some of these reasons would constitute a direct cause of the vagueness of the program, and others could be considered a consequence of the application of a program where the explanations concerning heuristic reasoning are excessively vague. Yeah, so this is the thing. They're saying we don't actually know what we're talking about here, so you can't say they're not following a rule because it's vague what we meant to begin with. And so the idea that they're not following the conjunction rule is you're applying it to a vague term anyway. And so why did you think there was it would follow the thing we would follow the conjunction rule when we're already dealing with a vague situation? Okay, so they make a little table here. It's very hard to describe tables in words. You'll have to just read this yourself if you want, because yeah, it's just difficult. I mean, I could read off the causes of vagueness and the consequences of vagueness. Yeah, but I'm just going to have to skip that for now. In the light of what had been previously stated, Adam Fighter says, I believe fuzzy logic is a logic that not only uses true and false as extremes, but also an infinite value in between the extremes. Yeah, I agree. That is what fuzzy logic is. Or that's at least one thing. I looked at this once a long time ago. There are fuzzy logics where you've got like a gradation, of course, of trues and false, and then you've got like lots of values in between. Then there's also like overlapping logics where you've got like different percentages of things, so they're not actually mixed, but like you've got like partial values of true and false and stuff. So lots of people have done a lot of crazy stuff, not crazy, but very creative stuff with true and false. So yeah. Are they suggesting fuzzy when they say vagueness? No. Generally, when philosophers say vague, it means that there is no fixed value, not that it has a value and the value is fuzzy. Because there may be a value, but we just don't know what it is and can't figure it out. But there may actually be a specific value. And I mentioned this earlier. I don't know if you might have missed it, but that's what epistemicism is. That's this technical term that says even if we can't figure out what an actual value is, like we can't figure out actually how many hairs you have to have on your head before we can say they're going bald, there is a value. And so it's not vague. It's not that we're using fuzzy logic in this case. It's that we don't have enough information or background to actually make the determination what the value is. So we can't deal with the information we have. And that's kind of what philosophers mean by vague. It means that the baggage we're carrying with the ideas is not sufficient for like the reasoning we're using. So that's different from ambiguous. Like, so if I say bank, there's two meanings and you just know, like, given context, what one means over the other, like the side of a river or a financial institution. Vagueness is like we just don't know what the terms are. So like you don't know what it counts to be going bald, but like there could technically be a value, but like we just don't have the background information at all, and that's a problem. So it's different from ambiguity where you know the differences, but vagueness is you just don't. Valpo asks, do I have any thoughts about epistemic versus metaphysical vagueness? Oh, good question. I have only just and this is a recent thing for me, about 2 years ago, I only just figured out what vagueness meant, and I asked a better philosopher than myself, because he works on vagueness. I asked him what it meant, and he gave me that, that definition of vagueness basically means baggage, philosophical baggage. I don't really think in terms of vagueness ever because of that. Like, it was only a recent thing that I figured out what philosophers were actually talking about. Yeah, the bank example is great. It's very useful. But that's ambiguity, not vagueness. It's not. You can be vague when you're talking, and the sentence you're using bank in could be a vague sentence, but the word itself is ambiguous. And so you've got a flip side. The sentence you're using, you could be vague about how you're using the sentence, but that's because the sentence itself does not have the required information to tell you what the sentence means. The word itself is ambiguous until you give it a context, but like that's the thing. The word is ambiguous on its own. The sentence is vague depending on how you used it. So basically, I guess the way I'm describing vagueness there would be epistemic. Do I think the universe is metaphysically vague? That would be a very strong statement about the way the universe is, that like the universe itself does not know or have the information, or it has baggage to be unclear about itself. Now, could the universe be itself vague? Sure, but the universe could be vague in that case, but that would just be saying like there's some weird things in the universe that like it just is unclear in itself. It could be, but for me to make any claim about that sort of thing would be a heavy-handed metaphysics that I'd have to make a claim one way or the other. I'd allow for it in the same sense that I allow for like I'm a little agnostic on what's it called? Power consistent logics on like dialethism. Like, is there something that can be both true and false? I don't know everything in this universe. And so like I basically claim I actually lean towards dialethism, because the status quo is that, like, you know, things are true or false but not both. That's the Aristotle, and that's the status quo. I am not going to be that confident. I think you need a little bit more humility in the face of logic, and so I actually lean towards dialethism because I don't know if anything could be both true and false at the same time. I don't like it's maybe some of the paradoxes could get close to being that sort of phenomenon. I'd have to say the same thing about metaphysical vagueness. I don't have any reason to think one way or the other, but for me to claim that there is no metaphysical vagueness would be massively a massive case of philosophical hubris. And then epistemically, I mean, it would seem like it would follow, like, just sort of, why can't we have things that are just like baggage in our mind? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the epistemic would just be derivative from the metaphysical at that point. Yeah. Yeah, so Adam Fighter, if you don't know, Valpo is a professor of philosophy, so asking some of the hard questions. Yeah. But yeah, if anything I said there didn't make sense, you can ask me to clarify. But like epistemic vagueness would say basically that in the things that we know, things could be vague. It's like, yeah, why wouldn't there be things that we just couldn't know? Because there would be too much, we'd need to have too much background knowledge. Like maybe how our own brain works would be something that would be inherently vague to us. We would never be able to figure out how our own brain works, because that would make, like, you know, if I knew how my own brain worked, then I'd have to know how the brain worked, and then like it would be like self-membered. I'd have to know how my brain worked, and then in that little brain that I knew how it worked, I'd have to be able to see how it worked in that worked, and like it'd be a, you know, an infinitely deep thing. And so you just can't know how your own brain works. Maybe I can know how someone else's brain works, but I can't know how my own brain works, because then it would just be like my brain would have to know how it worked, and then that smaller one would have to know how it worked ad infinitum. And so it would be inherently vague to at least know how your own brain works. Maybe you can learn how some other brain works, but not your own. Yeah. Okay. Where the hell was I? Yeah, and feel free to ask more questions. I mean, we're already halfway through the paper, and more than halfway through the paper, I think. So, we're okay. Okay. So, let me just restart this paragraph. In light of what has been previously stated, Gigerenzer affirms that in the analyzed program there are methodological factors wherein not only vague criteria concur, for example, they are not sufficiently demarcated, but also that they lead to a vague explanation concerning the described phenomenon. Yeah. Just like the universe can't know how its brain works. Yeah, well, I guess that would... Not sure, like, there's something called the Boltzmann brain, Vipers. You can look this one up. It's Max... was it Max Boltzmann or Ludwig Boltzmann, the inventor of statistical mechanics, said, look, if the imagine like the universe had a brain, then it would have to, like, you know, have like the universe could be thinking, but like then could the universe know how its own how it thought? Well, it would mean that the universe can't know that, because then the universe would be inside the universe, and it's a universal set problem. Yeah, string theory joke. That's what you tricked you. I saw that, and I couldn't get it out correctly. But like that's why I went for Boltzmann brain, because there was an old theory of this. So no, you were absolutely right. Like I knew it, but like I couldn't like say string theory joke. I was like, I bet that's what he meant. So, yeah. Oh yeah, and Adam Fighter. I don't know how you got here, but like there are some other philosophers on Twitch. Our buddy Aristotle streams Ask Me Anything. He's an ancient and ethics philosopher. Excellent guy. Same with Agni James over at Evolve Yourself TV. He does mind, metaphysics, and science. He's also a chess instructor, but he does a lot of meditation streams. There's a Ask a Philosopher once a month nowadays, group philosophy stream. And also our recent thing, there's God, like blanking his name, like philosophy writer, I think. Shoot, I should have added him in, but like he's just started streaming again, so hopefully I'll get a link. If he keeps it up, I'll throw him in with the philosophy group. But like he was reading some Plato thing last weekend, so that's cool. Okay. Author says, before explaining why I consider it important to demarcate the sense of the concept of vagueness in this debate, I will briefly refer to the range of problems, for example, social, epistemic, learning-related, etc., encompassed by research on heuristic reasoning. Only in this way is it possible to judge whether or not it is relevant to turn this debate in order to analyze the use of the term vagueness. With the help of some graphics, we will present the most relevant conclusions reached by Gigerenzer while analyzing Kahneman and Tversky's program. It must not be forgotten that the objective of the program of the ABC research group at the Max Planck Institute is to present a conception of heuristic reasoning which is less vague than the previous one. Therefore, it seems reasonable to evaluate if they have succeeded or not. Challenges associated with heuristic reasoning. For some authors, the study of heuristics must be related to the goal of clarifying our theories about the world, for example, popular conceptions about the laws of physics, folk conceptions, etc. This is precisely the form it takes in the work of Barron, 93, who introduced the term moral heuristics to describe the norms that make up our naive morality. Barron's contribution was fundamental as it later instigated a perspective on moral judgment in which it was described as being associated with two different cognitive systems, an intuitive system and a rational system. According to Sunstein, heuristics rely on system 1, the intuitive system, which is why they are quick, do not demand a great cognitive effort, and are in a certain sense inaccessible to the conscious and entail a parallel process which some have related to emotions. If heuristics are a type of strategy related to the natural capacity to value and to make judgments in order to produce an estimation or a prediction, how can we identify them? In Kahneman and Tversky, their detection is possible as they are identified with strategies that take the form of mental shortcuts used unconsciously, as there is no deliberate will to use these strategies by people to solve specific problems. All right, so first box, the reluctance to propose precise models does not fit with, that's the second box, the stated goal of specifying the underlying cognitive process. Okay, yeah, so this is the whole thing. They've got this inherent system where they can't tell you what's happening, and so they have to be a little bit vague. Yeah, so the model is inaccurate. This is one of Gigerenzer's thing, where you're basically, if you have to guarantee that you're not going to talk about one of the models because you can't, because it's dealing with like emotions or something. All right. In 1974, Tversky and Kahneman maintained that people trust in a limited number of heuristic principles that reduce the complex task of assigning probabilities and predicting values to a simpler judgment operations. Gigerenzer's research program can be understood as a contribution to the set of controversies that the cited publication generated. According to what we have seen, their main objective is to detect these simple and frugal heuristics, to determine what role they play in each realm of knowledge, and to describe their function without isolating them from the context in which they are used. The fundamental trait of the ABC Group's project focuses on a simple idea, that in the real world, heuristics generally function well. Despite this simplicity, this is one of the most relevant objections to the early works on heuristics, as many of the findings in the purported cognitive errors people purported cognitive errors people commit can be understood as consequences, that is, diagnoses, constructs generated by the experimental design of unfamiliar problems, and their performance is the description of the use or application of heuristics as if these were somehow indiscriminate. An example of this critique is the assessment made of the acceptations of the availability and Rees heuristics, the use of which is presented ad hoc. Yeah, so basically they're saying, look, if this even is how we think in terms of heuristics, that you can find a question that trips everyone else, that doesn't tell you anything you want to know, that only tells you how you defined the program to begin with, because that's the whole point. If you're looking for heuristics that break at certain spots and you define them as such, you will find places you've just defined the problem, and so you haven't actually discovered anything, because this was the definition of heuristics to begin with. Thank you for the drink. All right. So this is another picture. First box says, if one starts by relying on numerical assessment, this implies that, and these are two things that are implied. One, there are properties that can be measured, and the properties of what is measured can be more sharply characterized. Yeah, so like you can measure it and that the numbers actually mean something. So if you start relying on numerical assessments, of course, the idea that you can put numbers on everything is not always a good idea. It isn't. Okay. Another famous objection about the model, the difficulty of making measurements and or improving existing ones. So, first box, Kahneman and Tversky persist in one-word explanation, representativeness. So they said, is this something that represents how the world is? And so the two boxes off that, there is no specification of the cognitive process labeled representativeness. Yeah, so does the mind actually represent anything? And secondly, a fortiori, no theory of how this process relates to any specific content, context, or representation of numerical information. Yeah, so how does actually you assign a number to anything in the world? How does that number actually relate to the world that you are assigning to anything if you're just assigning it by, an arbitrary probability or whatever? That's like, is that in your head? Is that in the world? But how do you actually know what is represented by the representativeness of your thoughts? The heuristics and biases. Yeah. Okay. In response to the aforementioned objections, in 2002, Kahneman and Frederick published Representativeness Revisited, Attribute Substitution in Intuitive Judgment, and a work in which they maintained that heuristics are mental shortcuts used when we are interested in evaluating what they call a target attribute. In these circumstances, people generally substitute a heuristic attribute of the object itself that is presented to us because it is easier to manage. Heuristics would therefore operate through substitution processes for an attribute. Okay, so let me give you an example, because I don't know if that made sense. If you're trying to catch a ball thrown at you, what you do is you try to move so that your head you keep your head like looking at the ball, and if you can get the ball to like move as little as possible, then it's coming to you. So that's all you're doing. If you're trying to get the ball to come right at you to catch it, you make it so that when you're focused on the ball, it doesn't appear to be moving or as little as possible. And so that will actually guarantee that the ball comes at you, so that you're substituting the movement of the shake of the ball in your visual field as a way to get to align yourself in your motion moving towards the ball, so that it doesn't appear to be moving, so that you can catch the ball, as opposed to doing the complex physics to figure out the trajectory of the ball. All you have to do is keep your eye on the ball and make it so that your body, as you move, the ball appears to be moving as little as possible. This is a classic example, Vipers. This is why philosophers don't play sports. Philosophers do play sports. They just don't think about it. But that's the point. People will intuitively be able to catch the ball by keeping their eye on the ball. That's what people mean by keep your eye on the ball. If you do that, you will intuitively be able to catch a ball better, because you will once you understand that you have to just keep the ball from moving in your visual field. But this is the heuristic. But that's the sort of the substitution process they're saying. No one actually does the complex math to figure out trajectories. That never happened. Or we don't think it ever happens. But you do something else, like keeping your eye on the ball and make it move as little as possible relative to everything else. Okay. Collective tools. Yeah, so ask me about that. But this is a good example. And this is the thing. like I was driving along. This was last year or 2 years ago now, and a rock I was on the highway, the parkway actually, as it were, near me, and a rock got kicked up, and I could see it floating. It looked like it was floating, and I immediately remembered this heuristic. I said, "I'm fucked," because sorry about that, but like I knew the rock was coming right at me. It was not a small rock. It was like a grapefruit sized rock, and like so a grapefruit sized rock appeared to be floating, and I just was like, I'm screwed. It's coming right at me, and I didn't want to like jam on the accelerator or like hit the brakes because I'm on the highway. And so I just like slowly eased off my I just took my foot off the gas. Hey, Pink Lady 90, how you doing? Welcome in. And basically it just hit the front of my car and hit the front light. So the front light has a crack in it now, the plastic of the front headlight. But like this happened, and I was just like, oh my god, it's floating, it's coming right at me. And I knew it because I had read the philosophy stuff about this, and so I immediately knew when something appears to not be moving in air, that means it's coming directly at you. So yeah, I did think about it, and it was helpful, and I was able to not freak out and get into an accident. I just got some car damage, which is manageable. Hey, Pink Lady, we are reading a paper on heuristics and mind at this point. If you have any questions, you let me know. You can ask me basically anything you want about philosophy. I reserve the right not to answer. But like, you're welcome to try and ask about the paper. We've got some very smart people in chat too. Yeah, thank you, Vipers. That's the paper. If you are interested in it, you can click on it and download it for yourself. This is kind of what I do here. I used to play Minesweeper, but I want to get back to playing some video games. But at the moment, I just treat philosophy like a video game, and we play it and we make fun of it and try to have discussions off of it and see if there's any good ideas. And I'm going to start reviewing papers more formally too, so that'll be good. Yep, let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so collective tools for discussion and social change. In the programs that we have mentioned so far, one of the consistent defining characteristics of heuristics, it's funny, characteristics of heuristics is the belief that they are not declarative propositions, but rather procedures that can be applied to very different problems, and these are precisely the ones that present an unlimited variety of contents. Pink Lady 90 says, great, I'm a fresh student of philosophy, now currently studying pre-Socratic philosophers and all that stuff. That is fantastic. I mean, welcome in. If you are interested in like more pre-Socratics, our buddy Aristotle in the first link there is an ancient guy, and he usually streams like 2-3 times a week, so you can hang out with that. So if you are interested in philosophy, there is plenty of, well, I wouldn't say plenty. There is a handful of philosophy stuff. And for anyone else that's new here, we also have some other friends. If you're interested in history and sociology, you go check out our buddy Shane McGinnis, and sociology, Marxism, and just overall wonderfulness, Infernal, who you can ask them basically anything you want, and she knows something about it. So she's smart. They're in the links in chat. Aristotle, of course, is the ancient ethics, and you can ask him anything. He's the first link on the first thing I shared right there. We can give him a shout out. See if that worked. There we go. So yeah, if you click on the little heart on the top of your chat, then you can just do the one-click follow. And I thank you, Twitch, for this was the most useful single thing I think you've done in terms of usability for helping us discoverability on streams. So that's always a nice thing. So they have done other stuff that doesn't suck, but like this is the best for discoverability, which is always the hardest thing on these websites like YouTube or Twitch and whatnot. Yes, I know my voice is going. We have to get through this and finish up. Thank you, Vipers. Okay, where was I? Yeah. So this is what I was just saying. The heuristic to know that when like projectiles are coming right at you, an unlimited variety of contents. Like when I was driving a car, I knew that I was in danger of getting hit by a rock, because like you can use that heuristic in other things, not just in like baseball, but like in, you know, projectile, like other projectiles too. Okay. However, the research results of several authors, some of them members of the ABC research group, can be used to establish a coordinated counter-argument on this point. Using brief statements, I will enumerate the works that I have selected, indicating very concisely why they can be used as counter-arguments. Okay. A. Reasoning heuristically based on the content of what is learned. Rieskamp offers an interpretation of the learning process by which this could be modeled progressively using the same selection strategies that employed in learning. The results of his research make a clear appeal to the position of those who maintain that people are equipped with a repertoire of different cognitive strategies and that we simply make use of them when we are called to make estimations or decisions. Learning precisely how to select strategies which would improve and modify the results of our learning would turn this perspective around, not just because it would introduce dynamism to this process, but because the subjective expectations of the learner would play a fundamental role in our heuristic reasoning, for example, thereby selecting the most successful option according to the representation of the problem, recursively modifying the selection of applicable heuristics as a function of the learning opportunities experienced, etc. Kunda's classic article on motivated reasoning sheds light on the research context in which Rieskamp's research can be framed beyond the ABC research program on ecological rationality. It appears that learning is an important factor that needs to be taken into account when interpreting inferences in a situation in which outcome feedback is provided. Therefore, the conclusions regarding how people make their inferences depend on provided learning opportunity. Depending on whether the learning opportunities are sufficient to allow people to adapt to the specific environment, conclusions might differ concerning whether people make their inferences adaptively. Okay, so basically how you learn to reason matters, and so like you've got built-in biases, and that's why people aren't, so then if you are talking about the Linda problem again, where people are making like cognitive mistakes according to the rules of probability, that's really a problem of education according to this research. You could say like it's not a cognitive fallacy where people are reasoning incorrectly, it's just a failure of the education system and how we've been brought up to apply our heuristics. Okay. B. Reasoning heuristically based on the content of defeasible beliefs. Navarro and Leah's perspective in the article Rationality, Logic, and Heuristics refutes Gigerenzer's vision of the role of logic, not just when reasoning heuristically, but also when selecting precise heuristics from our particular toolbox. Given that this selection depends on basic beliefs, and given that the structure of socio-cultural context, to use Gigerenzer's terminology, in which our life unfolds can eventually bring about in us contradictory beliefs, our heuristic reason can be understood as part of a paraconsistent system geared towards processing information that arises from context from situations. Beliefs should be added to the concept of context in the ecological rationality model. Our contexts are contexts of belief, for example, which we are in, have been in, observe in others to be in, etc. Human inferential systems are paraconsistent. Paraconsistent means things can be both true and false. That means consistency would be things are either true or false. Paraconsistent would be things can be both true and false, maybe neither true nor false, or like gaps or overlaps between like truth, falsity, or whatever. So there are things that might have no truth values and things that may have both truth values. That's paraconsistency in logic. So human inferential systems are paraconsistent in the sense that we have contradictory beliefs, yet reasoning continues through the use of heuristics without collapsing into triviality. Many heuristics are content-specific or domain-specific. Some heuristics are learned from experience and many successful executions are due to familiarity with contextual parameters. These parameters are important if an agent is to react rationally to highly contextual environmental variables, for instance, those involved in natural language processing. Heuristics often exemplify non-monotonic reasoning because in many cases they produce defeasible beliefs retractable in the face of new evidence. Okay, so unlike the other one where it says, well, it's all depending on learning how you end up applying your heuristics, it says, well, you've got background beliefs on how you apply your heuristics. Again, you should not just be applying a rule like the conjunction rule. You should be applying, you have to know what the beliefs are that are being analyzed, and that determines your heuristics. So just like the teaching, what you learned depends on how you apply your heuristics. What you believe also matters to the heuristics that you're going to apply. Okay. C. Reasoning heuristically based on the change in content of the heuristics of folk psychology. Okay, so we had learning, we had the background beliefs, and now we're going to have folk psychology as something else, like how you interpret the scene, I think, is what this is going to mean. Okay, if the analysis of the use of heuristics has to do with learning, the results in folk psychology research should be integrated within this vast set as through it we make use of a type of popular causation with which we also make use of our heuristics. This kind of popular causation may not allow us to make predictions or explanations in a strict sense, that is, because they give reason to believe that something may occur or because they explain why something has occurred, but it does allow us to establish existent causal relationships between the states of belief, desires, fears, etc. Quote, and if this is true, then heuristic idealizations of common sense should be evaluated based on the successful or unsuccessful intentional predictions they lead to, not by the truth or falsehood of a description of reality that they do not make. Of course, the history of our folk psychology has not concluded. The patrons of social interactions are in a permanent state of flux. Also, there is no doubt that scientific development has a certain influence on the avatars of common sense. Yeah, so again, how you put things together in your head will affect your heuristics. So, not just the learning, not just the beliefs, but all the interactions now. Okay. Both the learning of strategies, whether later it's applied to the act itself of learning heuristics in determined context or not, and the learning, simulated or not, of folk psychology heuristics justify a review of the classical theories on heuristics from a social viewpoint. It is our view that the descriptive and normative perspective of heuristics cannot be reduced to the discussion of whether moral heuristics exist or whether these can be cataloged to make their use, for example, in the world of judicial argumentation, more understandable. Because even so, the task of learning how we forge our heuristics socially, whether or not these are unfair from an epistemic viewpoint, or whether social heuristics can be transformed using other socially constructed heuristics, thus relegate them to dialectics, where Aristotle placed them, would still have to be undertaken in order to analyze them as social and collective tools for discussion and social change. Yeah, so if we're talking about psychology and how it gets used in practice, these are interactive things in social and collective, interactive things that we talk about. That's the dialectics. So not only how we use our heuristics, it matters in context of social and political interactions for social understanding of things. Yeah, so that's the whole thing. It's not just the learning, it's not just your beliefs, it's then how it's processed in your social milieu, the social context. That is also how you have to look at heuristics. So, okay, and this is coda, so this is just the end. What exactly does coda mean in this case? This is a cool way to end a paper, because I hate writing conclusion all the times. Sometimes I just don't even do it, I just leave the last section blank, but I should use coda, that seems better. Sounds cooler. Anywho, this is the end, so if you have any questions, let me know. Coda, the acquisition of beliefs through learning processes, distinguishing states and relations of dependency between belief states, learning folk mental causation models, etc. They are all activities through which reason and contents, and at the same time, they are activities through which we actively attend to the formation of cognitive processes. I have selected the Gigerenzer versus Kahneman and Tversky controversy because I consider that, in some way, it is the result of considering vagueness in its relationship with temporality, but not with the inherent vagueness of propositions, of the terms used in natural language, of the diffuse sets that people employ to reason and to use our socially constructed heuristics through learning processes, folk mental causation, theories of belief, etc. Yeah, concluding event remark section. Thank you for the definition. In his new novel, is a kind of coda to his previous books, from Latin cauda, tale. Yeah, so I'm gonna start using coda now whenever I write something. It's much better than conclusion. It sounds cooler. Old Latin, very sort of philosophical geeky thing to do, so that sounds like a good plan. Okay, what is missing in this controversy? And this is the thing. I dislike this sort of just laundry list of words which they just made me read here. But yeah, this is what philosophers do. What is missing in this controversy, which took place a decade after the publication of Zadeh Fuzzy Sets and Applications, is a reflection on vagueness. Gigerenzer assumes that vagueness and lack of precision are negative terms. He does not think that vagueness might be a characteristic of heuristic reasoning, but rather that it is a pernicious property of characteristic of Kahneman and Tversky's heuristic and biases program, and b, a negative consequence derived from the application of their program to the study of heuristic reasoning. Against this conception of vagueness, other authors offer a description of human reason as a process that could not be understood without fuzziness as a principal trait of linguistic concepts. If I am not mistaken, this would be the case of Trillis. Quote, taking acquired full development with the typically social human manifestation called storytelling with, at least its two modalities of discourse and narrative that, either in different oral, spatial hand signs or written forms on Twix right here, not only support storytelling, but also with abstraction, could be considered among the highest expression of the brain capability of thinking, surely reinforced during evolution by the physical possibilities of the human body to tackle and to consider the possible usefulness of objects. Storytelling can be roughly described as constructing chains of sentences organized with some purpose. Thinking and storytelling are merely names for abstract concepts covering the totality of those human actions designated by the verbs to think, to tell, to discuss, of which only the last two can be directly observed by the lay person. Yeah, this freaking whole first half of this paragraph this is all one sentence, like down to there. Like, come on, man. Okay, so basically it's saying, look, all of this thinking stuff, that's crap. It's all just a way for us, like humans, to, interact with each other, to tell and to discuss. And that's all we can really see at the end. And so after that, it's going to get vague because we just don't have more information. Okay. These descriptions of human reasoning and of such common operations as dialogue, narration, telling something to someone are of enormous interest. This is so because taking them and the ideas that they set in motion as a starting point, the existing production in the field of psychology of reasoning concerning heuristics could be reinterpreted. The use and function of heuristics makes sense precisely because precision and certainty cannot be reached acritically by making predictions before seeing how people throw the dice and what problems each of us solve in the most complex game of all, that of communication. And anyone here on, this is a good point. I just like bringing this stuff up, but anytime you're on Twitch, you know how hard it is to communicate in Twitch chat. If you're here for the more than a few hours and you're trying to chat on like these online forums where I can talk and you get my context, but I'm not getting it from you, this is like the hardest thing to do. And this is why there's so many fights online, is because it's so hard to talk in this way. Okay. In that complex and daily game, the majority of inference processes are of a semantic rather than syntactic nature. Yeah, because if it was syntax, it would just be like you could read off the grammar immediately and know what it was meaning, but you can't do that. The meaning of sets of the dices thrown in the air should not be dissociated from the fuzzy traits implicit in the premises. Essentially, I think that in this controversy, conjectures are made prematurely. It would have been desirable to establish an acceptation of vagueness in some sense. Saying that the Kahneman and Tversky program is too vague because it explains too much could be used as an argument against Gigerenzer himself, as the acceptation of vagueness he uses is too vague. Yeah, so he's saying, look, there is going to be vagueness, and so the fact that you're trying to explain things, that's okay as long as you accept vagueness. If you stop accepting vagueness, well, then you don't understand what you're talking about either, Gigerenzer. Okay, but this is a secondary matter related to the analysis of arguments. What I consider more important is the analysis of the consequences of his argument, which I consider to be weak because it hindered his last analysis of, at the very least, the following problems. A. What is the function of heuristics in approximate reasoning where imprecision and uncertainty are intrinsic attributes? B, are heuristics intrinsically vague? C, is the use people make of certain heuristics in certain situations predictable? Even taking into account the great value of the subsequent contributions of the ABC group and their ecological rationality program, I consider that there is still much to do in this field, and I think that, as Trillis says, at this point, human capability of conjecture appears as something fundamental. Okie dokie. This was not bad. I don't know if I agree that defining vagueness within psychology is a good strategy, but you can see where, look, if you have a theory about how people are, you could say that there's going to be something vague about this because we don't have mind and psychology all worked out. So there is going to be something that we just are not going to have. Now, is this a problem? Is this a destined to fail sort of theory where you're saying, look, things are inherently vague, and so you have defined yourself to not be able to solve the problem that you're trying to solve? And I think both Kahneman and Tversky and Giger Renzer would yell at this author saying, look, you have set yourself up not to be able to solve the problem you want to set up. Either Kahneman and Tversky are going to say, look, we're trying to investigate the heuristics that are attempting to get at the correct sort of thing, which is the rules of probability, or Giger Renzer, who's saying we're not trying to get at the rules of probability, we're trying to get at something else, but vagueness either way is just going to hinder us. You shouldn't build in the vagueness, because if you build in the vagueness, then you've built in uncertainty into your theory to begin with, and you're never going to get an answer. One time I said I liked precision. I think I need to revise that. Yeah, Vipers, I'm sorry. You're starting to actually sound like a reasonable philosopher now. You're starting to realize that there is no no easy way. It's you want to do your precision, but it's not always helpful. Sometimes you need a little bit of breathing room, elbow room, Lebensraum. Yeah. So, but this is a nice paper. They set out their thing. They argued what they did. They gave this 3 cases in which the arguments that were made in this disagreement in 1996 could be reinterpreted to go against their what the people were saying themselves. And so yeah. Yeah, I can appreciate that. There are 2 types of philosophy. There's the robust logical reasoning and shower thoughts, and you like the more robust stuff. Yeah. But again, if you're only doing the precision stuff, you don't go anywhere because you're just talking about logic, and that's a fine thing. Talk about logic all you want, but you're not going to get a whole lot of philosophy out of that. But you need a little bit of other concepts to get yourself going anywhere, to talk about philosophy of mind, to talk about psychology. Then you get more interesting topics. Otherwise, you're really just focusing on the math, which is a fine thing in itself, but it's not philosophy, or it's not it's a limited philosophy at that point. But yeah, so the idea that vagueness is built into heuristics, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a very Kantian thought that there's a heuristic in itself that we're never actually going to reach because it's a vague thing. And this is why I was complaining before that this is setting yourself up to fail. It's a Ding and Zocht. You're setting that you're never going to get to the actual noumena, the thing in itself. You're never going to get to the right heuristic because it is going to be inherently vague in parts of it, and you can't access that. So have you set yourself up to fail? Maybe. And that's why I think these people wouldn't like what this author is saying here. But as far as a Kantian approach to heuristics, maybe this isn't a bad idea, and maybe people would like to do a Kantian analysis of these things. I'm not Kantian. I would pick one of the other ways to go. I think I'm on the Giger Renzer side of this, even though I disagree on other reasons. But I think Giger Renzer is right, but for different reasons. And I think I wouldn't want to build my theory like this, where I feel you're destined to fail. But that said, are there things that this author has gotten right? Yeah, the reinterpretation of the research that was given. These are all very good points down here, where they were reinterpreting different ways through learning, through beliefs, through psychology, that we can't actually figure out exactly what's going on in any given case. Those are very good points. So if you're starting from the biases and heuristics in the Kahneman and Tversky thing, maybe you've got problems, and that is a good analysis of the problems that are inherent in the Kahneman and Tversky position, and the author has pointed that out. Now, do you have to go full? You have to also reject Gigerenzer? Maybe not. Maybe the because they only kind of hand waved at that up here. What they said, what was it? Where they said they disagreed with Gigerenzer. They said that Gigerenzer was too quick. Where is that? Yeah, so it was right over here. This was like this paragraph here. They were saying that Gigerenzer is too quick. Like their disagreement starts precisely in the point where Gigerenzer accuses Kahneman Tversky of proposal of being vague, and they were saying that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's accurate. Viper says, I watched a video the other day on Tegmark's mathematical universe theory. He proposes that everything is based on something, like biology is based on chemistry, which is based on physics, and the further you go to the bottom, then the less natural language we use to describe it, and the more pure math. Okay, so yeah, it's a very Platonic thing. Like you're getting down to some sort of Platonic form, and that would just be like some sort of string theory at the end of the universe. Sure, people think that. Don't know if it's a good idea, but I mean, the only thing I'd have to say about that is that we get more and more abstract, then we get more and more like math. That doesn't mean abstract is fundamental. It just means we've been abstracting away. I'm not watching it now. Yeah, it's this is I've made this joke not in a while, but you also once you start getting from like big things down to smaller and smaller and smaller things. Yeah, I don't have time. I know these things. Like I've already seen this. I don't need to watch another video about this. But it's like, why do you think things that are smaller are more fundamental? Really? Like really? Why is it that when you keep going down, like the biology is based on chemistry, which is smaller than it. Why are the small things fundamental? Really? Like, what argument do you have for the fundamentality of smallness? Like, why is small good? A lot of times smallness is not good. So it's like, really? Like, if you can start to do that, like, if you can start to explain why you think things that are smaller are good in this area, then you might understand, like, well, is it really that it's getting smaller or more abstract? What is it about the, well, I knew you'd get the joke, Vipers. But, like, what is it about explanation and, like, maybe causal power, like causal explanatory power, that you can explain more and more? But can you? You really can't explain, like, social theory from physics. Like, maybe you can explain some biology with some chemistry, but it really doesn't work most of the time. You can't. Reductionism most of the time has a lot of problems. A lot of problems. Reducing chemistry to physics, not straightforward. It doesn't always work. There's technical problems that are very hard with reducing statistical mechanics to rules of probability. Things do not work out the way you think they do. And so it's like, yeah. So you have to, like, if you think you're abstracting it, this tends to be what I would consider a little, quite often, it gets to wishy-washy reductionist philosophy. And it's not, the reductionism, it's very hard to make. So yeah, like, that's actually relating it back to this paper. The idea that you can reduce what we're doing to heuristics. How does that actually work? And that's the whole point here, is that you can't do it. Like, they're saying that vagueness is built in. So the idea that you can abstract away our behaviors into, like, these, like, heuristics, and then the heuristics would be built on, like, mental structures, which would then be, you know, reducible to, like, biological structures, which would be reducible to chemistry. It's not actually going to work. Like, it's going to be very hard to go from that level of mind down to anything else. And so this is the thing. Okay. Do we have anything else to say? My voice is dead, and I've been streaming for almost 3 hours. On the upside, we had better papers today. Like, this stuff was at least, I think, much like, this is probably one of the better days for, yeah, this is it for the water, basically. So we had the John Simons editorial piece where we were talking about the future of publishing philosophy, and then we had this, which is, I think, a competent piece in philosophy of mind in this area. So Pretty good. I thank you, Valpo and Vipers, for these papers.